This is a presentation of Universal 7, Governance and Management. Best of Stafford Beer's Cybernetic Wisdom.
Impolite warning. To fix a broken world, cybernetics must make a strong and decisive comeback. 20 years after his death, Stafford Beer's words of cybernetic wisdom have the power to do that. Here is the lifeline. Cybernetics revolutionized the world for the better after World War II. In just one lifetime, it gave us the amazing technologies that propelled us to the digital era. Now cybernetics must return to the forefront of public awareness. The reason is simple. The law, the economy, and the politics have not evolved to benefit us by using cybernetic thinking and its principles. The world can ill afford the absurd capitalism-socialism rivalry that is poisoning public policy discussions, while authoritarianism goes rampant everywhere. As you will attest, the real confrontation should be between the Newtonian worldview and the cybernetic paradigm, two very different ways of acquiring and applying knowledge. One spawned the problem, the other is the solution. I am warned constantly that cybernetics lost its luster decades ago, that a vulgar notion of cybernetics has settled in the public's consciousness, and that mental habits are too hard to eradicate. Sorry. Too bad if some people are too pusillanimous to reprogram their worldview. Books cannot be rewritten to please simplistic minds. Life is complex, and getting dangerously more so every day. The founders of cybernetics did everything right. Cybernetics is the mother of complexity science, artificial intelligence, robotics, and many other jealous sciences that go after research money, military grants, or provide comfy tenures. So, don't expect political correctness.
More importantly, I must say it up front, Stafford Beer's organizational cybernetics appears as if inspired by the words of the Bible, in regards to the recursive nature of the structure of the body of Christ. My brother Hernan and I have explained this perfect match at length, in another YouTube video, called Management Lessons from the Bible, the Body of Christ. This is not all. Amazing as it might seem, Stafford Beer's viable system and the Bible's teachings on organization find yet another incredible match, the U.S. Constitution. Many won't accept this, but it is a scientific fact. Christianity is not only a religion. It has modern cybernetic science to back it up as a system of government, just like the one created by the Founding Fathers of the United States of America, with advice from the Iroquois and the prescriptions found in the Great Law of Peace. To those pseudo-revolutionaries who are attacking the U.S. Constitution, you do so based on the tenacity method of fixing belief, described by Stafford Beer. It is obvious you are ignorant of the cybernetics that makes it work. If these words offend you, stop watching now. If not, give learning cybernetics a shot, and become a true revolutionary. It is never too late for the world to revisit Stafford Beer's words of cybernetic wisdom. Some of his books go 50 years back. However, the need to organize human affairs using nature's own cybernetic laws makes perfect sense now, more than ever. Watch this video and you will agree that humanity has simply not made the transition to the cybernetic paradigm. The proper language is absent. Stafford made warnings that are more valid today than ever. The arsenal of technology we possess, with ultra-fast computers, iPhones and the internet, are not necessarily used as instruments of liberty but of oppression. You will understand this after you learn what happens when computers are placed on the wrong side of the variety equation. Many readers of his books complain about Beer's elaborate style of writing. I have removed that excuse by making a careful selection of ideas from 5 of his books: Heart of Enterprise, Platform for Change, Brain of the Firm, Diagnosing the System for Organizations, and Designing Freedom. I make it as easy as it gets. Complexity is the stuff of management, Beer forewarned us. This was true and urgent decades ago, but not enough people listened. Today, with bureaucratic and socialistic egos running wild with their hunger to curtail personal freedoms, we are risking not only more stolen elections in the hands of a deep state or deep pockets machinery, but losing the infinite game of democracy as well. This video should serve as a guide for the American defenders of freedom. As an attorney, it is easy for me to see that the United States Constitution needs all the help it can get to prevail over the voices that endorse socialism. Was Stafford Beer a socialist because he helped Allen's government in Chile in 1973? Find out for yourself. He was definitely not Marxist nor Leninist. Sit back and listen carefully, everybody's future is on the line. Remember his teachings. Your plan against big government will be what you do with what you know. Beer's Liberty Machine is the next step of capitalism. People living free, while sharing some vital economic information, without capitulating to big government. Minimum, but effective regulation at every recursion level, just like in nature.
These are the 5 books quoted in this video.
Traditional management. Machiavelli was perhaps the best 16th century writer on management topics. Most enterprises are directed with the driver's eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. Structural change is so potent a business, and so traumatic to undergo, that people prefer to pretend they cannot see what their own eyes insistently report, rather than commit themselves to the reshaping which is necessary. We used to say that management dealt with the 4 M's: men, materials, machinery, money. Today, the stuff of management includes the 4 M's, but is best denoted as complexity. Organization charts are really devices for apportioning blame when something goes wrong. They specify responsibility and the chain of command, instead of the machinery that makes the firm tick. We are trying to live within an organizational stereotype that does not work. The most common mistake is to seize on the existing organization chart of the institution, and blithely to assume that every division or department shown as depending from the boss is a viable system in its own right, and therefore an operational element in System 1. In order to get rid of the concept of an institution as a fixed entity, and start looking at it as a system, we have to get rid of the classical picture of its organization. You know how this looks. The institution's activity is divided into chunks, which are also perceived as entities. These chunks are divided into smaller chunks, and so on. In every chunk, there is a boss man, with lesser bosses reporting to him, and running the smaller chunks. This picture looks like a family tree, and it is useful for just one purpose. If something goes wrong, you can use the picture to trace whose fault it is. Our institutions are failing because they are disobeying laws of effective organization, which their administrators do not know about. Decisions? The taking of a decision is best described as the fixing of a belief. Decisions have to do more with learning to survive than with the objective analysis of profitability. 4 methods for fixing belief. 1. Tenacity uses the process of conditioning investigated by Pavlov. 2. Appeal to authority, where the believer finds himself inside a system, of which he is an indivisible part, so that the behavior is inescapably affected by the gross behavior of the system itself. 3. A priority uses the fact that all communication, even with oneself, requires a language in which to communicate, and assumes its ostensibly scientific conclusions in the premises which underlie the axioms of that language. All 3 justified on practical effectiveness. 4. Method of science. Expertise of rigor. System. As far as I can tell, the Greeks, even the greatest of Greeks, Aristotle, had not the faintest sliver of understanding here, the notion of system. A system is not something given in nature, but something defined by intelligence. The detection of a system in the world outside ourselves is a subjective matter. Systems detected in the world outside ourselves are models, mappings of our own brains onto the world. Difficult to find any significant awareness of system in the thought of even the greatest minds of the Western world, until the 17th century. A system consists of a group of elements dynamically related in time according to some coherent pattern. This system has a purpose. It is you, the observer of the system, who recognizes its purpose. The observer is always part of the system. He determines its nature, its purpose, its variety. Models. A model is not an analogy. Models are more than analogies. They are meant to disclose the key structure of the system under study. Model is a mental representation of the world that is not direct perception of the world. A model is neither true nor false, it is more or less useful. A model of management system which we know, first-hand, to be admirable and survival-worthy, the human nervous system. The more the neurophysiological model is studied in detail, the more astonishingly accurate does it seem to be in reflecting what happens in the firm. A model is not a load of mathematics, as some people think, nor is it some unrealizable ideal, as others believe. It is simply an account, expressed as you will, of the actual organization of a real system. The current notion of a corporate model is a set of simultaneous equations, fed into a computer, which then optimizes the values of controllable variables, under some maximizing functional. Instead, we are discussing a cybernetic model of the necessary and sufficient conditions of any viable system, as illuminating the managerial structure and behavior of that organization. One of the major mechanisms, perhaps the most important of all, which operates in the self-regulation of systems is the mechanism of feedback. This term has become very popular and is often wrongly because too loosely used. Explicitly, feedback does not refer to a response provoked by a stimulus. Managers commonly say, "I have had some feedback about my suggestion on so and so." This usage perverts a critically important idea. The simplest form of feedback to understand is called error-actuated negative feedback. There are three basic characteristics of viable systems which can profitably be studied by cybernetics in terms of multiple feedback loops. First, significant outputs must be under control. Second, the system as a whole must be stable. Third, the system must be able to learn, adapt and evolve.
The important thing to realize about systems is how they are controlled. And we must get rid of any notion straight away that control is something imposed on the system from outside. It has to be built into it. Now, you saw me operate this governor just now and noticed how the engine slowed down. Let's see how the mechanism works. Suppose the engine is racing, then the governor flies open like that. You see it lifting here, transmitting the message along here, lifting that cam up here, and then shutting off a valve there. That is built into the system. It's called feedback, and feedback is ubiquitous in control systems.
Positive feedback, the tendency of some changes to be automatically reinforced. The expansion of the highly organized at the expense of the less highly organized is a typical example of positive feedback. Positive feedback can be relied upon to steer the progressive bias towards viable behavior, once the bias exists. This is what the self-organization capability means. Cybernetics. Cybernetics, originally defined by the late Norbert Wiener as the science of control and communication in the animal and the machine. This original definition points to the relationship between control and communication, and to the existence of general laws affecting equally animate and inanimate systems. The first principle of such general importance to be recognized was the significance of feedback in all systems, whatever the fabric of their components. 30 years on, this new definition might be preferred. Cybernetics is the science of effective organization. Cybernetic laws underwrite the survival capability of viable systems in terms of entropy and negentropy, the measures which bring energy and information into the same calculus. And these same laws determine new structures, engineered in terms of linkage, and feedback, and stability. This is the language of system. There are general laws, which govern control processes, whatever the system under governance. These laws apply to computers and servo mechanisms, to the human nervous system, to populations of animals, to the economy, into every other large, complex probabilistic system, such as the business firm. Cybernetic laws are universal. The book, Heart of Enterprise, is concerned with management cybernetics, the science of effective organization. 4. Cybernetics is an interdisciplinary science, owing as much to biology as to physics, as much as to the study of the brain as to the study of computers, and owing also a great deal to the formal languages of science, for providing tools with which the behavior of all these systems can be objectively described. For cybernetics is the science of control, and management is the profession of control. Soon discovered that there were certain principles, or natural laws, governing the behavior of systems under control, which, regardless of the particular form or context of the system, were quite general, and to which scientific expression could be given. The main discovery of cybernetics, after a history of 25 years, is that there are fundamental principles of control, which apply to all large systems. The cybernetic founders realized that the feedback of information is ubiquitous in regulation for every sort of system, was a major scientific discovery. Cybernetics points to the existence of laws or principles of control that apply to all kinds of complex systems, whether animate or inanimate, technical or societary. Cybernetics is actually done by comparing models of complex systems with each other, and seeking the control features which appear common to them all. Cybernetics, remember, is the science of effective organization. Control. The first principle of control is that the controller is part of the system under control. The control function is spread through the architecture of the system. There are three fundamental components of any control system, as we have seen: an input setup, an output setup, and the network that connects the two. Most of the control systems in which cyberneticians are interested mix analog and digital computation. Control is integral and control is intrinsic. The solution is, as it is found on an engine governor, so to design the machine that in the very process of going out of control, it is brought back onto control. This regulatory process of intrinsic control sees to it that Ashby's law is automatically obeyed, therefore, there is no loss possible in the balancing of the variety equation. The stability of the system, in which we are acutely interested, derives from the ability of its subsystems to absorb one another's variety. To this extent, control is intrinsic to the system. If varieties in a regulatory system are disbalanced, the system cannot attain stability. Assuming that the regulator has the smaller variety, there are only two ways of meeting the demand of Ashby's law. One is to attenuate variety in the system, the other is to amplify variety in the regulator. These strategies can be mixed, Examination of institutional systems often reveal that the attenuators and the amplifiers have been installed in the wrong loops, on the wrong side of the equation. Black box. It is not necessary to enter the black box to understand the nature of the function it performs. The variety of a black box is, raise the output variety to the power of the input variety. It is not necessary to enter the black box to calculate the variety that it potentially may generate. Variety and complexity. The new world is characterized by the need to manage complexity. Complexity is the very stuff of today's world. A clearly formulated concept of complexity is needed, and its scientific name is variety. The variety of anything is its number of distinguishable elements. The measure of complexity is called variety. Variety is defined as the number of possible states of whatever it is whose complexity we want to measure. The tool for handling complexity is organization. A homomorphic mapping makes a many-one reduction in variety, and it does so legitimately, because it preserves relevant structure. Managers destroy variety. Three basic tools for variety amplification: the computer, teleprocessing, and the techniques of the science of effective organization, which is what I call cybernetics. We used to say that management dealt with the 4 M's: men, materials, machinery, money. Today the stuff of management includes the 4 M's, but is best denoted as complexity. Every move we make that constrains complexity also blocks off opportunity. All our major societary institutions are high-variety systems. All of them need to have a finite relaxation time, but all of them are subject to constant perturbation. There is one way to cope: they have to reduce the variety of the system. The mode of organization adopted for the system is its variety controller. The currently explosive rate of change produces perturbations at intervals that are shorter than the relaxation time of our institutional system. When varieties are disbalanced, as they usually are, we structure our organizations to cope. Fundamentally, there are 2 ways, and only 2 ways of doing this. The first, to reduce the variety generated by the system, so that it matches the available supply of regulatory variety. The alternative, to amplify the variety of the regulatory part of the total system. If we cannot recognize the stable state, it follows that we cannot learn how to reach it. There is no reference point. If we cannot learn how to reach stability, we cannot devise adaptive strategies, because the learning machinery is missing. If we cannot adapt, we cannot evolve. Homeostasis. Homeostasis is that feature of an organism which holds some critical variable steady within physiological limits. Ultrastability, an ultrastable system, is capable of resuming a steady state after it has been disturbed in a way not envisaged by its designer. Entropy. Entropy is a measure of the disbalance of energy in a system. How much useful work a system could do is called entropy. When the heat has evened out, this ratio has risen to unity. The system is dead, in the sense that activity within it stops. The rise of entropy happens automatically. It is a law of nature that, other things being equal, entropy tends to its maximum. There is a natural law, refer to it as entropy, which causes isolated systems to change their internal structure if they are left alone. The tendency is irreversible, and is found everywhere in nature. If we have a universe, which is improbable although it exists, it is because the second law of thermodynamics has two forms. One is concerned with the pressure to even out energy, that is the form, which belongs to our stereotyped conception of the universe. It betokens death. The other form is about information content, which leads to greater organization and increasing complexity. That form betokens life. We should not regard these principles as contraries. We should not think of the second law of thermodynamics as warring with some perverse other law. These are forms of the same principle, which between them express the balance of nature. Entropy expresses and measures a flow of energy in one direction, negentropy expresses and measures a counterpoising flow of information in the direction opposite. The universe results. Every complex system is held in being at the balance of its entropy and negentropy. We human beings mean more than the few pence worth of our chemical constituents, because information informs those component chemicals by means of the genetic blueprint. Life itself is a big neg-entropy pump. Information. Information is that which changes us. In cybernetics, surprisingly perhaps, negentropy is a measure of information. That is, a system gaining entropy is also losing information. A system which is dead, energyless, has no information to yield. People are also aware that the mathematical theory of communication, concerned as it is with the transmission of bits, does not concern itself with semantic information, which is to say, what the bit means to the recipient. Cyberneticians realized early on that systems exist, and run, and are controlled by virtue of an information content. When Wiener, the ranking mathematician, set out to measure that information content, he came up with a formula, which was the exact negative of the expression used for entropy in statistical mechanics. So although entropy inexorably tends to increase, that tendency is barred by injections of information. A system that is organizationally disbalanced will tend to become more so. The reason is that organization is more akin to available information than available energy. Recursion. In a recursive organizational structure, any viable system contains and is contained in a viable system. What is true of the small business is a fortiori true of the large business. The really big firm is an amalgam of smaller firms, there are divisions, subsidiaries and so forth. Whatever viable system we wish to model exists in a variety of recursive dimensions. Organizations are collections of decision elements, and the channels by which they are connected, the neurons, and their processes in the brain, men and their communications in the firm. Structure. For statements made by Maturana, the term structure emphasizes the relations between the parts, as well as the identity of the parts which constitute a whole. 1. The word organization emphasizes the relations which define a system as a unity, and thus determine its properties, with no reference to the nature of the components, which can be any, as long as they satisfy these relations. 2. If the organization of a system changes, the identity of the system changes, and it becomes a new one, a different unity with different properties. 3. Conversely, if the organization of a system stays invariant while its structure changes, the system remains the same, and its identity stays unchanged. 4. Although we make these connotational distinctions, in the use of the terms structure and organization, we are usually unaware of them, and thus do not realize that the organization of a system is by necessity invariant. We talk about change of organization, without realizing that such a change implies a change of system. Requisite variety, and ASHBY'S law. ASHBY'S law: only variety absorbs variety. The law of requisite variety entails an equation, in which both attenuators and amplifiers are inevitably involved. It has always seemed to me that ASHBY'S law stands to management science, as Newton's laws stand to physics. It is central to a coherent account of complexity control. Only variety can destroy variety. People have found this tautologous, but all mathematics is either tautologous or wrong. People have found it truistic. In that case, why do managers constantly act as if it were false? Monetary controls do not have requisite variety to regulate the economy. The Finance Act does not have requisite variety to regulate tax evasion. Police procedures do not have requisite variety to suppress crime. And so on. All these regulators could be redesigned according to cybernetic principles. Variety is the very stuff and substance of modern management in a newly complicated milieu, just as physical matter was the stuff and substance with which our forefathers had to wrestle. Uncertainty is a function of variety. Variety is a measure of the number of possible states of the system. A decision is the selection of one possible state from all others. Management is shown to be the task of manipulating that complexity. The measure of the number of possible states is called variety. Then it is the manager's job to be a variety engineer. Remember, the lethal variety attenuator is sheer ignorance. Cohesiveness. Cohesiveness is the primary characteristic of organizations. Viability. Viable, able to maintain a separate existence. There are a great many ways of characterizing an enterprise. The law has one way, economics another, the financial press has a third, and so on. From the cybernetic standpoint, I think that the most useful characterization of the enterprise is as a viable system. We cannot conceive of a viable system as being totally enclosed, and totally foreign to the environment with which it interacts. Ecologically, the viability of a system as guaranteed by its interaction with the environment is exemplified in the model by the metamorphosis of inputs into outputs and vice versa. It seems unlikely that James Watt himself, in inventing the steam engine governor, really understood that he had discovered a principle of life. Brain of the firm proposed a neurocybernetic model of any enterprise, conceived as a viable system. The firm is something organic, which intends to survive, and that is why I call it a viable system. The viable system is a system that survives. It coheres, it is integral. It is homeostatically balanced, both internally and externally, but it has nonetheless mechanisms and opportunities to grow and learn, to evolve and to adapt, to become more and more potent in its environment. A viable system is autopoietic. In order to survive as a viable system, it must produce itself. Evidently, systems 2, 3, 4, and 5 are not individually autopoietic, because they have no status in their own right. They are subservient systems of the total viable system. The viable system model as we now see it exists to be used. It has taken nearly 30 years to develop to this form, the first 20 mainly in the context of the firm. But it is not some kind of straitjacket. Think of it instead as a well-structured language for discussing viable systems. Every viable system contains, and is contained in, a viable system. This concept of an organizational nest is crucial to this account of how enterprises really work, and is contrasted with the orthodox concept of hierarchy. The management unit, the box, is seen to be embedded in a circle. This symbol stands for the operations that the management unit is supposed to regulate. They are under its control. Those operations are in turn embedded in the amoeba-like symbol, which stands for the relevant environment of the operations concerned. This environment is multidimensional. It consists of a market, a supply situation, of customers and/or users, of the general public, and so on. Its boundaries are hazy. The viable system model has been applied to all kinds of organization, not only to firms. From a learned society to a university faculty, from schools to hospitals, from one branch of social service to another, from government agency to Department of State, from province to federation, and, in a multiple application, to the socio-industrial economy of a whole nation. If there are natural laws governing viable systems, then all viable systems will be found to obey them. The metasystem exists to undertake whatever functions are required to procure coherence. System 1 is not sufficient as a condition of viability. Clarifies mistake made in brain of the firm, where he says it is viable. Constraint within the institution, that exceeds the minimal variety reduction, that is needed to ensure the cohesion, that betokens viability, is oppressive. Compulsion to remain an element of a system, of whose purposes one disapproves is oppressive. Diagnosis of the ills of any particular institution becomes possible simply because the language is also competent to express the principles of effective organization that are embodied in the science of cybernetics. According to the cybernetic model of any viable system, there are 5 necessary and sufficient subsystems, interactively involved in any organism, or organization that is capable of maintaining its identity, independently of other such organisms, within a shared environment. This set of rules will therefore apply to an organism, such as a human being, or to an organization, consisting of human beings, such as the state. Viable systems of all kinds are subject to breakdown. Such breakdowns may be diagnosed simply in the fact that some inadequacy in the system can be traced to malfunction in one of the 5 subsystems, where in turn, one of the cybernetic features that compose the rules will be found not to be functioning. Confidence in the VSM, as applied to societary systems, derives not so much from the fact that the pathology of the viable system can be investigated with ease, as from the speed with which the diagnosis can be made. The knowledgeable user may expect to home in on, say, half a dozen causes of concern, within a day or so, of exposure to the real-life system. The planning function. Planning is a continuous process. The constant readjustment of rational expectations against shifting scenarios. Planning happens only when there is an active decision. This act commits resources now, so that the future may be different from what would otherwise have simply happened to us. Planners are managers, who are entitled to commit resources. Plans must continuously abort. So planning is not an activity carried out by professionals called planners, it is an active decision, carried out by managers, empowered to commit resources to a different future. Planning is not an activity resulting in products called plans, it is a continuous process, whereby the process itself, namely that of aborting plans, is the payoff. The plans do not have to be implemented or not by those in authority, what the authority does, constitutes the plan, and its realization. The fact is, that the endless flux of the planning process, undertaken by managers, and constantly aborted by their own decisions, is the reality of management. The rest is illusion. To partake in the continuous managerial process, of aborting decisions, that is to direct the company. It is to plan. And in that planning process the manager dispenses the cohesive glue. The institution hangs together, because and only because, plans are constantly aborting, and, in so doing, realizing the actuality called profit and loss, success and failure, reward and punishment, happiness and misery, and, in the long run for the viable system, life and death. Plans are the embodiment of the intentions, subscribed to at each level of recursion, since these intentions are constantly changing, and not in a homogeneous way, with respect either to time or to probability, they must continuously abort. The only characteristic worth detecting, measuring, reporting, or doing anything about, is incipient instability in the system. Planning is a continuous and adaptive process. System 4, the planning function, houses the viable system's whole apparatus for adaptation. It follows that System 4 must contain a model of the viable system of which it is a System 4. It is the primary task of System 4, planning function in the VSM, to interrogate the outside world. And if possible, to invent that institution's future. Planning on the basis of actuality, I call programming. Planning on the basis of capability, I call planning by objectives. Planning on the basis of potentiality, I call normative planning. System 4, the planning function, is not only concerned to manage the outside and then, but to provide self-awareness for the system in focus. The brain. Ultimately, neither the brain nor the firm is an analyzer, but a recognizer. That is why speed of recognition is so important, while analytic power is relatively unimportant. We must recognize, and then react. Otherwise, analysis may consume too many precious weeks, and a viable response to a threat will be, as lawyers say, out of time. Governance. Our international, national and local regulatory systems are so constructed as to try to flout ASHBY'S law, and how they conspicuously fail in that attempt. When it comes to understanding political situations, those responsible for constructing cognitive models seem to be extremely selective in what is allowed to count as pertinent information. The pressure to consume way beyond the natural need. All this is demanded by the way we have arranged our economy. And the institutions we have built to operate that economy, to safeguard ourselves, protect our homes, care for and educate our families, have all grown into large and powerful pieces of social machinery, which suddenly seem not so much protective as actually threatening. The redesign of institutions, from firms to governments, from educational establishments to social services, is the end to which survival-minded people must address themselves. I am proposing simply that society should use its tools to redesign its institutions, and to operate those institutions quite differently. You can imagine all the problems. But the first and gravest problem is in the mind, screwed down by all those cultural constraints. The vision I am trying to create for you is of an economy that works like our own bodies. There are nerves, extending from the governmental brain, throughout the country, accepting information continuously. So this is what is called a real-time control system. Insofar as we wish to control the world, whether as citizens, or as individuals within a personal environment, our powers of regulation are cybernetically constrained by the model we hold of what needs to be regulated. Our stereotypes will continue to assure us that these problems are economic and political, and that we have the machinery to handle them. They are not in essence economic or political problems at all. They are cybernetic problems, and there is no machinery. The individual citizen has found more and more things to do, and this proliferates variety in his tax affairs. If he deliberately obscures this situation, he is injecting yet more variety into the situation. In trying to match this variety, more and more regulations are introduced, until it is doubtful whether anyone can work out what is happening. A similar situation exists for the police and even for less obvious social regulators, existing within education, health and social welfare. Maturana proposed this alternative: corruption, all those acts which do not validate the system we want to validate. The way of production is still a necessary feature of the Chilean Revolution, but that the way of regulation is an extra requirement of a complex world, not experienced by Marx or Lenin. The difficulty is how to replace Homo faber with a new kind of man. He will not be man the maker any longer. He will be man the steersman of large, complex, interactive systems. I'll call him Homo Governator. Self-organization. The features of living systems, which we most admire and seek to understand, are properties of self-organizing systems. Learning and adaptation, growth and evolution, occur through entropic processes, which do not demand control centers, but utilize pervasive, natural laws. The enterprise, then, is an organic whole. It is an homeostat built of homeostats. It is an ultra-stable machine. It is, very largely, a self-organizing system. Redundancy of potential command turns out to be the prerequisite capability of any self-organizing system, and given this prerequisite, the system will indeed organize itself. Life. Life itself is a big neg entropy pump. Life is devoted to the preservation of its own organization. Autopoiesis. The primary characteristic of a viable system is not the power of self-reproduction, but of self-production. It is continuously in business to produce itself, to be what it is, to preserve its identity. Bureaucracy. Bureaucratic systems, by their very nature, cannot promote swift action, because delaying tactics dissipate the energy of reform. If we ask the cybernetic question, for which autopoietic system is this flow of corrupt money the salary? We shall be led straight to the pathological structure that requires diagnosis and treatment. What counts as a crisis is the expectation of loss of control, in other words, cybernetic breakdown in the institution. This does not refer to an inability to impose decisions, it means that the institution is out of control itself. Anyone who has dealings with a public inquiry knows too well that the bureaucracy has the power to amplify its variety indefinitely, in terms of the time, money, and expert advice, it is free to deploy against a little band of citizens. Bureaucracies install amplifiers in one loop of the homeostat, when they should be installing attenuators in the other, and vice versa. Yet buried inside the institution, is a nucleus which retains its homeostasis, by ignoring not only external change, but the primary function itself. This nucleus is the special kind of homeostat that produces itself. And it is this nucleus that I call the bureaucracy, an institution within the institution that exists, Narcissus-like, in self-regard. Bureaucracies do accept change. But what change they make is superficial, and they are made so that organization, which is what makes the system that it is and no other, is completely preserved. Our institutions will go on, producing the social benefits of their activities, simply as byproducts of their major bureaucratic undertaking, which is to produce themselves. They have themselves become viable systems that produce themselves. Now, a parasitic growth depends on its host's continued existence, it is true, but the parasite may flourish at the host's expense. Computers. The computer can generate untold variety, and all of this is pumped into a system originally designed to handle the output of 100 quill pens. The trouble with computers is that we are using them on the wrong side of the variety equation. Computers are now the nutrient medium for the growth of cancerous vertical amplifiers in the firm and in society. Just as the computer is used on the wrong side of the variety equation to make instability more unstable and possibly catastrophic, so are telecommunications used to raise expectations, but not to satisfy them. This is what I mean by using computers as variety handlers on the right side of the equation. They have to accept all manner of input and attenuate its variety automatically. What they will pass on to the control room is whatever matters. The data, does not need to be stored in those gigantic data banks we keep hearing about, and if you are particularly interested in freedom, you will see every reason for throwing it away. I believe we are all captives of gigantic systems beyond our individual control, and we need to understand them. Centralization and decentralization. How do we sustain individual liberty and societary cohesion at the same time? The discussion always seems to lead straight into the same disastrous trap, a false dichotomy between the notions of centralization and decentralization. For a viable system, the classic dichotomy between centralization and decentralization draws a useless distinction. Viable systems, which include institutions, require a complicated blend of central and peripheral regulatory information. The Liberty Machine. The big question. How do we sustain individual liberty and societary cohesion at the same time? Rather than to solve problems, it is clever to dissolve them. The Liberty Machine. Misunderstandings. Explicitly, feedback does not refer to a response provoked by a stimulus. Managers commonly say, "I have had some feedback about my suggestion on so and so." This usage perverts a critically important idea. Among the criticisms that the Liberty Machine has evoked, one says, it is the death of individual freedom. Another, that this whole approach to running a country presupposes a regime in which the state either owns industry, or intervenes massively in its affairs. I am tired of being told that the computer threatens our freedom, that cybernetics is a tool of the devil, that real-time governmental regulators are too dangerous to employ. The Liberty Machine. Love of freedom. The continuous process of liberating our minds from the programs implanted in our brains is a prerequisite of personal evolution. Freedom is in principle a computable function of systemic purpose as perceived. Autonomy, at any recursion level, is a computable function of the purpose of a viable system. Such freedom as we have is our most treasured possession, and we know how to be vigilant. The Liberty Machine. What not to do. The extent to which we have lost freedom is due to loss of control over the variety attenuators, education, publishing, and to the centralization of power at the wrong levels of recursion. Education constrains variety, because, although it may open new vistas, it leads us to reduce the alternatives that we are prepared to entertain. Publishing, the media, constrains variety, because, although it too may open new vistas, it decides in practice what alternatives shall be accessible to us to entertain. The result is that people hold all sorts of beliefs about such potent issues as free will and determinism, freedom and oppression, economic good and social justice, that are buttressed by scientific distinctions that are out of date. As long as these remain cybernetically organized so as to produce themselves, our societary institutions remain set on courses that lead to catastrophic instability. The Liberty Machine. What to do? The future is something we use our freedom to determine. In the eyes of cybernetics, the whole business of human freedom may be seen as a constantly adjusting balance between the two methods, variety generation for the controller, and variety inhibition in the controlled. This freedom could be reclaimed, using the new scientific tools at our disposal, but only if new democratic machinery is established to replace existing bureaucracies. I have expressed the view that the whole business of government, that gargantuan institution, is a kind of machine meant to operate the country in the interests of individual freedom, so I declared, let us redesign this liberty machine to be not an entity characterized by more or less constraint, but a dynamic viable system that has liberty as its output. Please appreciate that once you start to use systems thinking, you need fewer data than before, because the data are synthesized within the model of the system. I by no means envisage that a private business would supply more information than it does now, probably less. I will go as far as to suggest a real definition of liberty for our current technological area. It would say that competent information is free to act, and that this is the principle on which the new liberty machine should be designed.
The purpose of a system is what it does.